Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Meyer. I'm our Sustainable Food Programs Coordinator at the University of California, Merced. Today, we're here to talk to Sophie Egan about all things food-related, sustainable food, food waste, food and climate, snacks, probably her awesome book that I devoured called Devoured, aptly named. And how to be a conscious eater was also very interesting and something we can talk about. So just a little background as to how these sessions will go. So Sophie is going to introduce themselves, followed by a presentation. We're going to try to have some Zoom polls. We'll see how that works, Zoom. And then we will open up the floor to any questions. So if you have questions, you can either put them in the chat during the presentation, or after the presentation, you can also put them in the chat, followed by the option to also raise your digital hand on Zoom, or if you're on video, to raise your physical hand. And then I also have some questions that came into the Zoom registration, which if we have time, I will also get to as well. All right, with all that being said, Sophie, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everyone. Great to be with you. I am zooming in from Miami Beach, Florida, where I just landed for the Aspen Ideas Climate Festival. And I'm really excited to be chatting with you today. So thank you so much for the invitation, Erin. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see those slides? Thumbs up, slides.
Yep, we're good.
Fantastic. So I am going to, I wear a lot of different hats, which I'll talk about in a moment in my intro, but for today, I'm really going to focus on some insights from my role as director of the Stanford Food Institute and Sustainable Food Systems. And so I'll talk for about 20-25 minutes and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A, as Erin mentioned. So I'll start with a brief introduction, dive into kind of the overview, very high level of our One Plate, One Planet Sustainable Food Program, and then give you some really concrete insights from what I call playbooks for progress. And these are two open source playbooks that we published last year that are really high impact strategies for climate smart dining, one on food waste prevention and one on food choice architecture. And then, as I mentioned, plenty of time for Q&A. So I think about the total breadth of roles and work that I do as really advancing food systems change from both the bottom up and top down. So the top down piece is working with food service decision makers, institutional food service, which I'm humbled and grateful to be in this leadership position with Stanford Dining, and also co-director of the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative, which is a global network of colleges and universities that are all using campus dining halls to advance healthy, sustainable, delicious food choices. And really, that work that I do is intended to make the food environments more conducive to healthy, sustainable food choices by changing what's available in the first place, making it ultra appealing, available, culturally relevant, absolutely delicious and irresistible, and easy to select and enjoy on a regular basis. The bottom up part, the writer hat, the speaker hat, is really to try to help eaters navigate the food environments that we currently have, which are not always set up in that optimal way, and really can make a conscious eater feel like they're swimming upstream, and just that kind of all the forces are working against them. So Erin, the kind words about my books most recently is How to Be a Conscious Eater, Making Food Choices That Are Good for You, Others, and the Planet. And then I'm also a contributor to the New York Times Health section. Really try to, across all of my writing, bring a really strong evidence-based, very kind of just the facts, bottom line answers to top of mind questions about what to eat, because it can be daunting. And even food professionals like myself, we can find these things to be very complicated when really food is joy, food is love, and it should just sometimes I feel like it just shouldn't be so darn complicated. So that's how it all kind of fits together. And there's some other roles beyond this, but for today, I'm excited to share, like, as I said, from our One Plate, One Planet Sustainable Food Program. So Stanford has a long legacy of a pioneering sustainable food program. It's one of the first universities to have a dedicated sustainable food program manager. And it really builds on this foundation of the Department of Stanford Residential Dining Enterprises, which, as you see, has built a sustainable future at the very core. And we know that sustainability means many different things to different people. And with our One Plate, One Planet program, we've chosen to focus on 6 key areas uh, to really work to leverage our purchasing power, thought leadership, menu design, culinary creativity and diversity, and our partnerships and collaborations to support. So these are our 6 pillars, and I'm going to spend the majority of my time on this first one about climate smart dining, so I won't get into that too much at the moment, but just to briefly touch on the other 5. Racial equity and supporting Black businesses. We have a really robust set of initiatives on supplier diversity and equitable supply chains. And one of the things I'm most excited about in 2023 is that we actually earned an Office of Community Engagement grant to work with our nonprofit partner, Oakland-based Farms to Grow, to develop open source toolkits that can help institutional food service leaders purchase from Black farms and also help Black farmers navigate institutional distribution channels, which they've historically been systemically discriminated and kept out of. And this is an area that we've been building towards this work for quite a few years, and it is really kind of a key step towards sharing our own program and what we've learned and how we've been able to help reverse the disappearance of Black farms in America through our institutional purchasing power. Third is curbing deforestation through supply chain pressure. And this is one of the pillars that's a little bit more in its infancy, where we're really at the moment trying to best identify our greatest leverage point. It's not always obvious where that lies. Deforestation is such a massive contributor to climate change that we really want to focus our efforts where they can be most impactful. So doing a lot of diligence at the moment, looking at a couple different options. And then number 4 is an area of personal passion, thriving oceans. And it's actually what I'm here in Miami Beach to talk about, which is aquatic foods and the future of responsible aquaculture. And especially if you look at things like the Blue Food Assessment, which was led by Stanford researchers and Center for Ocean Solutions, it's surprising to a lot of people, but we can actually feed a growing global population with, while staying within planetary boundaries and optimizing nutrition by increasing foods from aquatic systems, if we focus on those that are the lowest impact on the environment, and especially bivalves, seaweeds, and small pelagic, so kind of small oily fish. But in general, sustainable seafood, which is one of the 24 menus of change principles that we've long adhered to, is a really important part of what we do. And we're strict adopters of the Seafood Watch framework. And we have really robust, rigorous measurement to ensure that we're not purchasing any that's certified or that it's designated as red, and only those that are green and yellow from Seafood Watch program. Number 5 is a really aspirational but exciting area about catalyzing a circular economy of food and really keeping natural resources in use and looking for closed loop solutions wherever possible. And then number 6 is really the one that kind of ties it all together, which is embracing systems thinking. And what by that I mean, we really focus on minimizing unintended consequences and looking for win-win-wins or multi-solving. So we'll never kind of look at something only through a sustainability lens. And this is a big theme of my own personal work, which is to just broaden the apertures and to, as much as possible, look at things through multiple imperatives. So for example, where do we optimize both human and environmental health? Where do we optimize, equitable livelihoods and sustainability and so forth? And the good news is more often than not, these things go hand in hand, but we have to look at making sure we're not sort of unintentionally choosing something that's really negative in one of these other areas as we're trying to do something really positive from an environmental perspective. So those are our core pillars, and I just give you that context because, as I mentioned, I'm going to dive really deeply into this first one. So I'm sure I'm not the first to tell you that food plays a critical role in reversing global warming. And I say that in the positive because it is often pointed to as food and agriculture being such a huge part of the problem. But that also means it's a huge part of the solution or can be. And that's what excites me. Honestly, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning is the incredibly positive potential of food-related climate solutions. And that's the thrust of all of my work, is accelerating solutions at the intersection of food, health, and climate. And this covers a lot of different territory. It's everything from our menus and what we source. I'll speak a little bit about specifically what that means, but also how food is grown, right? Regenerative agriculture as one example, and also the physical spaces. We're doing some work right now on dining, on decarbonization and commercial electrification of commercial kitchens, and looking at energy use in our dining halls. It's a very holistic array of imperatives that all kind of fall under the climate smart dining umbrella. If you're not familiar with Project Drawdown, they're one of the world's leading climate kind of think action tanks, and we are actually members of something called Drawdown Labs, which I'll share more about later on. But essentially, they published a list of the most impactful solutions for reversing global warming. And I, like many other food leaders, found it really an amazing call to action, how high ranking quite a few food related solutions are. So they actually rank reducing food waste to be the #1 solution for reversing global warming. And this is amazing when you look at things like the usual, transportation or clean energy solutions, which of course are still really important. But this is not, this is outranking quite a few other very high impact strategies. And it just shows you how many natural resources go into producing food and distributing food and packaging food and disposing of food. So it's a really just amazing opportunity. And it's exciting to see culturally how much momentum has taken off, both in the industry and among eaters and households, to do everything possible to mitigate this problem, because it's such a solvable problem. And it's an exciting, again, call to action when you look at the fact that it accounts for about 8% of total emissions. So we released our food waste prevention playbook, which again we see as a huge opportunity for climate action. And the same time, we actually announced a short-term target, so a self-imposed target to reduce our food waste by 25% by the end of 2022. We're still doing our data analysis from the end of winter quarter, but it's really building upon, as I said, years and years of already having been working on food waste reduction to kind of jumpstart this extra catalyst of action. And it's been amazing to witness in tandem that target. So kind of directionally as an organization, we're all on the same page about this, across all of our staff. But then also here's the toolkit, right? We have the insights in-house to reach this goal. It's not just here's a goal, good luck getting there. It's here a goal, let's all work together, rowing in the same direction, and here's all the different kind of levers. So again, this is open source. I can drop both of these in the chat, both playbooks in the chat after I'm done sharing my slides. And essentially, big picture, this is kind of our overall framework, where it starts at the leadership level. Eric Montel, who's Assistant Vice Provost for Stanford Residential and Dining Enterprises, Dining, Hospitality, and Auxiliaries, has made this a clear organizational priority from the outset. And that makes all the difference to have that very, very high level leadership buy-in and support, as well as from Dr. Shirley Everett, who's Senior Associate Vice Provost for R&DE overall. And then we really focus on collecting and analyzing data. This is just who we are, Nerd Nation. But I think it's become an increasing industry norm, is to say, hey, you can only manage what you measure, and data is really important. Cultivating a culture of food waste prevention is also incredibly important, where it just becomes taboo to not be really focused on this. And then this playbook actually focuses on this bucket in the bottom right about operationalizing best practices. So I just wanted to show you how it's sort of situated within these other big picture strategies. And then the end piece is really engaging students who are essential to that culture, because it's both back of house and front of house, or pre-consumer and post-consumer. We have actually an interesting fact in the food waste prevention playbook about how we find that actually signage is not that effective at reducing student food waste, which surprises a lot of people, right? You would think educating them about, if only you wasted less food, you'd save this many emissions. The reality is a lot of people aren't paying attention to that, or they're not thinking about, emissions when they're eating food. They want to just enjoy a good meal and so forth. But it's an incredibly important part of just saying this is a cultural norm. In these dining spaces, we together value food enough not to waste it. And that's really why we do actually do quite a bit of signage and engagement. So this pyramid is kind of the crux of the playbook, and I share it with you because I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm going to hit on the very top and the very bottom just to give you some kind of an idea of what's in here. And hopefully you've seen, and if you haven't, I can drop it in the chat, a really fantastic pyramid, the EPA food recovery hierarchy, which essentially is the kind of inspiration for our own hierarchy. It says, where can you have the biggest impact, right? Trying not to do everything all at once. Where can you really focus and channel your efforts as an organization? And it's the most upstream solution, source reduction, right? The food that you don't even bring into your environment as a dining operation, that's actually the highest impact strategy of all. And it might not feel as exciting as like really creative upcycling or repurposing, or really, fantastic kind of volunteer-based food donation efforts, but it's by far the most impactful because it doesn't go through all the subsequent steps. And so that's why we really, really focus on forecasting and ordering accurately, and we know it's it's the biggest bang for our buck in terms of impact. And then, compost, very important. These kind of things are very important, but it's actually the lowest impact, meaning it's kind of the last resort to even be looking at compost as an option, because again, it went through all the other steps and all those resources that were involved. So I'll touch on, as I said, kind of the top and the bottom of the pyramid. So really, again, source reduction, the food we don't even bring into our environment, that's the biggest opportunity. And we have a central production kitchen, which is a huge benefit to us to be able to really centralize and optimize all of our procurement data across all of our dining halls, and to be able to be very responsive in real time, and also to see annual patterns, right? Seasonality, weather changes, by quarter, when do students eat a lot more versus less, student exam schedules. And our chefs are incredible data wizards with this. It's really amazing they've got it to such a science. And we have gotten so good as an organization at that data or optimization to make sure that we're ordering and forecasting only as much as we really need. And something that I'll just mention is that we found that this is just the nature of chefs. They don't want to waste. So these are all very aligned imperatives. It feels intuitively, it feels yucky to waste food. If nobody likes it, nobody feels good about it. And I've also just really found throughout my time with any kind of change management that it's so much more impactful to have these messages coming from chefs and managers and our dining staff than from me, the sustainability person, right? Nobody wants to hear from the sustainability person. I just, feed my messages to the chefs who talk to students, who talk to their peers. And so when they have that intrinsic motivation, that inherent desire that's already aligned, it's really a recipe for success. I won't go into all of these. I'll just, shout out to our partners of LeanPath we've used for a long time, and they're very much partners. It's not just a platform, a technology tool, but it's really a partnership to kind of continuously iterate and improve the way that we incorporate LeanPath into our strategy. But one thing I just want to emphasize with this playbook that may not be obvious to everyone is that having LeanPath, having any kind of measurement tool is essential, but it is not your strategy. Your strategy is, what are the solutions you're deploying? How are you training people? How are you aligning on what the most important priorities are? And you have to, a measurement tool is only as effective as the people really putting it into practice and institutionalizing it. So I just want to say that sometimes there's a sort of conflating, such and such tool with that is our food waste strategy. And that was part of what this pyramid was really to do, was to say, hey, look, this is a piece of the puzzle, but it's not the whole puzzle. And then going to the bottom of the pyramid, the reason we call that toss is that there's actually a lot of other better options for surplus food than just compost. And again, nothing against compost, but it's not the be all end all. So we actually divert 100% of our organics that go into a dining hall compost dumpster to be converted into pig and dog feed. And if you look at the EPA hierarchy, that animal feed is a much preferred option because you're feeding living creatures, right? And you're preserving the nutrition and the value of all of those organics, all that really still quite good, organic matter isn't just going to waste. And I just say, where possible, finding programs like that. And then also we convert 100% of our used cooking oil from dining halls into biodiesel. again, and thinking about what are the alternatives, where are there kind of upcycled or repurposing or diversion opportunities that kind of go one or two notches up the pyramid from compost. And then, of course, like many campuses, we do have a zero waste initiative. And so we support the university's overall goal of a 90% diversion rate, and ensuring, again, that we're sending the remainder to compost. So time for a little audience interaction. Erin, if you're ready, we will try the poll. Oh, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so this is just kind of curious. It's not a right or wrong answer. I'm just curious from those in the audience, from your own experience, which of these is the most challenging food waste reduction strategy to put into practice? Is it forecasting and ordering accurately, portion control or just-in-time cooking, repurposing leftovers, donation, or kind of all the parts of toss? You can go ahead and submit your answer. And then, Erin, I think as the poll owner, you'll have to tell me what the results say.
All right, so we've got 0%. Oh, I can share them. So we've got 0% for forecasting. We have 29% for portion control / just-in-time cooking. We've got 14% at repurposing leftovers, 57% in donating, and 7% for tossing.
Awesome. Thank you. Great job with the poll, Erin. Well, it's really interesting to me to see that the answer I chose, donate, was actually the most common one. I find it just incredibly complex. There's a lot of stakeholders. There's a lot of variability, and I think it's incredibly important, but I just, again, kind of think I wanted to share this exercise to help you, and all of us in our operations where we have limited time, limited resources, to think about, is the highest effort really the highest impact? And just trying where possible to find, hey, it's great, maybe, I don't know if 0% of you said it's not too difficult to forecast and order accurately because you're not doing that, or if you said it because it's not actually hard. But hopefully you'll find that it's not that hard, and once you get into the habit of doing it, and then again, it can have a huge positive impact. So switching to the second playbook, again, Project Drawdown, a great scientific reference point, actually ranks plant-rich diets as the #2 solution for reversing global warming. So this is really exciting for a lot of different reasons. If any of you are involved in this kind of work, shifting diets is incredibly difficult, but the reason so many of us are investing so much time and effort is because the potential impact is enormous. And it's not only the impact on, the planet, again, kind of deforestation, land use, water, of course, greenhouse gas emissions, but it's also the fact that, as I was saying about systems thinking, what's good for the planet is also good for humans. And so we see repeatedly the synergies there. And I'll just jump ahead for a moment. Anyone who's familiar with the menus of change principles from the CIA, the Culinary Institute of America, and Harvard Chan School of Public Health, we at Stanford have adopted these principles long ago, which were really kind of that first evidence-based integrated roadmap for aligning nutrition and sustainability imperatives at a menu, operations, and sourcing level. But then we have also seen things like the Barilla double pyramid, which I think is one of my all-time favorite graphics, because it just shows you that line by line synergy between, positive impact on, or positive from a nutrition and intake perspective for humans, and low impact on the environment, and then all the way up the pyramid to really kind of not as great for humans, and ooh, wow, really high impact on the environment. So this all points to essentially what we've long called a plant-forward future. And I will pause for a moment on some nomenclature, which is to say we are not talking about a plant-based, as in a 100% plant-based, plant-only vegan way of eating. We're not trying to convert anyone to be vegan or vegetarian. We are merely among many in the industry and NGOs and academics who look at the data and say, it's very clear that for the future, again, to optimize human environmental health, an emphasis on foods that come from the plant kingdom is really going to be the best way forward. And in the US, this means quite a dramatic shift in food culture, in norms, in language, even how chefs have a tendency to refer to protein, to meat as protein and use those interchangeably. There's words like that, those subtle cues that actually we have a lot of sort of unlearning to do culturally and again, kind of professionally. But there's also just enormous positive upsides. There's a huge variety of delicious, kind of underappreciated foods. And part of why we really embrace the idea of plant forward or plant centric or plant positive, there's a lot of different terms, plant rich, of course, is that it's a much more inviting to the masses, at least in the US, to kind of go a more flexitarian way of eating, where you're just replacing some of your animal-based foods with plant-based foods, but it doesn't have to be all or nothing, black and white. And even looking at trading down, right? I mean, I think this is an area that often gets overlooked, is trading down from ruminants, the highest impact beef and lamb, say, to dairy or to poultry. That's a positive step in the right direction. And even the CIA and Harvard have a ton of different resources on the protein flip and different strategies, meat as a condiment, blended burgers, and so forth, that we've long implemented and that really do go a long way. The other major kind of reinforcement of this scientific imperative came from the Eat Lancet report. And there's currently a version 2 that's being developed, so take this with a grain of salt. But the point was that it sort of said, okay, you have the menus of change principles. If you've been paying attention to that, scientific reference point at a menu level, here's what it looks like at a plate level, at an individual meal. And it essentially boiled down to, hey, Americans, you should eat really no more than about a burger a week. And that's a really big change, right? If you're thinking about institutional food service, especially campus dining, if you have students who are eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner 7 days a week, and needing to think about, are you providing, again, that enabling environment, that food environment that makes this possible? So one other big reason kind of that we're so involved in this is that we at Stanford Dining are actually the pilot program for the university's Scope 3 emissions program. And this is really the next frontier. If any of you are part of climate action or just sustainability initiatives at a university level, there's been net zero targets and so forth that usually only focused on scopes 1 and 2. And scope 3 is actually the biggest chunk of total emissions. It's basically all purchased goods and services. It's the most complicated, the hardest to measure, but again, the biggest piece of the pie. So we are the pilot, and we actually announced a target at the end of 2022 to reduce food-related greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by 2030. And this is in line with the collective impact initiative that we co-lead with the Culinary Institute of America as part of that global network of colleges and universities that I mentioned, the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative. It's also the same as the Cool Food Pledge and many others. And this is really intentional because we try to, whenever possible, find those points of connection and be synergistic with existing initiatives. So one of the really exciting things about that collective impact initiative, and part of why we as Stanford felt comfortable setting our own target, is we've been able to learn from one another what works and what doesn't work. And there's an open source document called the Early Learnings Report. And we were really excited to celebrate at the end of last year, our first major milestone, which really shows, again, if you look at the piece of the pie, right, smallest slice of actual purchased pounds, so this is 61 million pounds across 24 participating institutions, accounts for 52.6% of total GHG. So that's where even a slight reduction in beef or lamb can have a really, really big reduction in emissions. And we saw an 11% collective decrease across just 2019 to 2021, which is actually a 40% dent in our target towards 2030. So we're incredibly pleased with the ability to measure and report out on this. But again, we know there's a long road ahead. And again, I'll just highlight kind of what worked. We saw reductions in beef and lamb and poultry, as I mentioned, but then actually, as I was showing you on that World Resources Institute scorecard, offsetting a lot of that with dairy and eggs. And then for us, there's tremendous potential to really increase legumes and whole grains and other even more sustainable options, especially in the protein realm. So I love social math. This collective impact shift has saved as many emissions as 45,000 people taking a cross-country flight round trip, and as much water as basically the daily shower for 218,000 people. So the food choice architecture playbook that we released last year, that second open source playbook, which is our own best articulation. It's not trying to tell everyone else what to do. It's just saying, here's what's working for us. Here are strategies in case they're helpful to you in your own work. They're all really designed towards this shift. How are we going to make these purchasing shifts while maintaining all of our cost imperatives, student satisfaction, global diversity of cuisine types, inclusive diets, allergies, and so forth, religious dietary needs, all the whole range, right? There's many competing factors. And this is what I was alluding to, is that as we set this target, this is essentially what this menu mix is going to look like. And sorry for the formatting thing there, but this is a major shift, and yet we've been gradually on this path already. So it's not going to happen overnight, but we really need to look at, well, what's going to enable us to start to replace pork and poultry and dairy and eggs even with more grains, nuts, seeds, legumes, and even sustainable seafood. So this is the toolkit of strategies. It's these 6 major buckets of different kind of food choice architecture concepts, if you will. And as before, I'm just going to share the first and the last as an example, and then I'll drop the playbook in the chat so you can dig into it in more detail. So menu mix, I mentioned menus of change principles. This has been a really essential North Star for us from the outset. And if you're not already deploying these principles, can't recommend it enough. But essentially, it's kind of a checklist of different ways to shift the menu, shift the sourcing, again, with that alignment of human and planetary health. Presentation, the food has to taste absolutely phenomenal and look phenomenal. And Plant Forward especially has a little bit of a handicap, if you will. It has to be even more alluring and appealing and appetizing, because there's often kind of a hesitation or a concern that plant-based proteins won't be as filling, or they won't be tasty, they won't be flavorful, they'll be bland and boring. So one of the things we do is really use taste-focused language, especially on vegetable-based and other plant-based and plant-forward dishes, to emphasize all the technique, the spices, the herbs, the provenance that go into those foods, just as we're very accustomed, even subconsciously, to seeing in the less healthy food options, which have already kind of used these marketing techniques in spades. So before we wrap up, I have one final poll question for you. Again, a little bit of audience interaction. So whenever you're ready, Erin, but I'll start to read it off. From your own experience, again, this is not a right or wrong answer, yeah, perfect. Which of these foods has had the biggest impact in your own work? And obviously you can just not answer if this is not applicable, on nudging diners toward healthy and sustainable food choices. Is it menu mix, defaults, that's portion sizes, placement, so kind of the sequence, smart lunchroom tactics, presentation, how visually appealing it is, or promotion and prompts? And go ahead and submit your answers, and then Erin, you can let us know. Big reveal.
All right. So we got 30% at menu mix.
Oh, can you show us?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh wow, okay, quite a spread.
Yeah, 30% at menu mix, 30% at defaults. Portions was 0%, 10% for placement, 40% for presentation, and 20% for promo and prompts.
Awesome. Well, thank you. That's really interesting. The researcher in me wishes that I was going to follow up with all of you and do a little pre-post study after you use the food choice architecture playbook. How do those numbers change? But anyway, maybe anecdotally, you can let me know if any of the strategies in the playbook help change that for you. But the best outcomes are really when you're using all of these in tandem, right? Because an eater is navigating the environment that might have all these different strings being pulled. And again, it's not manipulating or, people think about, oh, nanny state or whatnot. It's really about just in designing a food environment that even makes it possible and appealing and alluring and all these things to eat healthy and sustainable, right? For these to even be easy options, because again, whether we realize it or not, so much of the food environment historically has really been set up for the opposite. So with that, I will thank you for listening to these playbooks. I'll drop them in the chat and I'll open it up for questions.
All right, I did see one that came in about anaerobic digestion. Do you have thoughts on anaerobic digestion on campus?
I don't have a lot of thoughts on that. I know it's very common among, Menus of Change University Research Collaborative campus members. I've seen a fair number of them on, tours of member campuses. It a lot of times has to do with, the price of real estate on your campus, what other buildings and so forth are sort of slated. The other thing I'll just share, there's actually a really cool new project at Stanford that's trying to look at this again through more of that circular economy of food kind of lens, and is actually creating I believe it's called a zero waste innovation center. So it's really kind of incubating, entrepreneurial concepts, food, new brands and technical solutions, while actually serving as that on-site. I think it's going to be a compost site as well. But I have heard good things essentially from those who have anaerobic digesters, but we do not have one. Erin, I can just take questions in from the chat, I guess, directly as I see them. So Frank, and nice to see you, Frank. You mentioned electrifying kitchen equipment. How much pushback from chefs? How are you combating that? Yes. So I should say we're at the very early stages of this work. There is a professor named Rob Jackson in the Stanford Dover School of Sustainability who's really been at the forefront of this on the household level. And I'm sure many of you are aware that in some states and jurisdictions, there's actually legislation that will that most often only applies to new building construction. So there's not really debate or pushback so much if you have that in place when you're building, let's say, a new dining hall. So, well, this is the new policy. We'll figure out what's going to make it work. The real challenge comes from if you're trying to convert an existing dining hall because it's very expensive. But also there is less of that sort of inevitability in a way. So the pushback from chefs question is really interesting, and it's actually part of a three-pronged research study that we're doing with Professor Jackson, where we're doing actual emissions testing, methane emissions actually, in dining halls. But we also have one small dining hall that is entirely electric. And the main thing is to just really see how is the marketplace evolving, so that there's not so much of these trade-offs and making it feel like it's all sacrifice for dining staff to convert to induction and other electric kitchen equipment. But in some cases, it's actually not yet available, and so we're really just trying to continuously talk to suppliers and understand how they're designing these new options with chefs in mind, and hopefully with chefs' actual input. But we've actually seen that from those who have implemented it, and I would refer you to, in particular, Anna Bobot, who leads the work at LinkedIn and Microsoft. These have been two examples that are really at the forefront. I know in the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative that UC San Francisco is deep into this. And again, a lot of this has actually been spurred by either a new dining hall or legislation or some combination. So more to come on the chef's piece, but it's essentially what I was saying about that study is that we're actually using it to interview chefs, look at feasibility. So it's a feasibility and kind of landscape assessment on the equipment kind of marketplace, paired with chef interviews and understanding what their concerns, or really looking at it from an internal operations change management point of view before just ripping out all the equipment and saying good luck. So it's inviting all of our colleagues to really be stakeholders in these major changes. JT says, how can students and student organizations best help dining facilities move toward these sustainable initiatives, sourcing and transparency? Yeah, I love this question. I work with so many students, and it's one of the most fun parts of being in a university. Um, and I mean, we're students first, right? The students are our reason for being, and they're often among the most passionate about a lot of these topics. So I think a couple of things. One is to understand what your dining operation is already doing. Sometimes I'll have students who come and have this or that agenda item and complaint or whatever it is. And then I tell them the breadth of things we're doing, and they'll say, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea," and "Wow, I never thought of that." It sort of changes the conversation. So one is just ask, learn about what's already happening, and then find out where could they use help. Often there is a halftime person or a part of a person's job dedicated to sustainability, and students really can make up a lot of those supplemental resources for advancing a lot of these initiatives. Oh, hey, I love when students come and have research projects. So let's do a diligence study on reusables, or let's look into deforestation techniques. So you can really be a great research partner or just kind of problem solver but really developed with the leadership, co-developed, so that it's not sort of advocacy or finger waggy, why don't you do this, why don't you should do that, but it's really more of a, okay, let me understand what's already happening, where are the pain points, where do you want to do more but don't have the time or resources or yet the knowledge and ability to do more. And I think that's where the best outcomes occur. So we have a Stanford Food Institute internship. I have a graduate fellowship, and these students really, we intentionally have them immerse for the first quarter, not even trying to develop a whole project, to learn the full array of programs, tour dining halls, see how it works, and then they're able to kind of put all these pieces together and say, oh, now I could actually identify, an opportunity to research student perceptions or barriers to such and such, or propose a pilot, a food waste messaging study, whatever it is. So I think those are kind of some things I've seen work really well. Anna, how has Stanford worked towards zero waste on-campus catering? And what do student dining halls do with surplus prepared food? Is it packed and donated by whom? Yes, so we at Stanford Dining merged with our catering concessions and cafes about 9 months ago. And so we're in a process of essentially, marrying the best practices, and really helping to kind of integrate a lot of what we've found to work in dining halls into catering. But there's also some unique challenges, of course, with catered events and other contexts beyond dining halls. So essentially, the campus catering colleagues work with our sustainable food program, No One Fit, One Planet. They work with the zero waste colleagues across the university. And they're actually doing some really interesting work right now to look at those kind of top 5 annual events. So to look at those things that are a little bit more predictable, right? Okay, it's homecoming or family weekend that occur every year, and you have a little bit more precedent versus the bespoke kind of one of a kind events where maybe there's just so many more variables, but then also when there's such a high volume of people on campus. So I know that they're currently doing a big amount of work on those top 5 events in particular. And to answer your question, we work with our student group, Stanford Food Recovery, which helps our dining hall staff pack up surplus food. And we have a really exciting partnership with our produce distributor, which is Daylight Foods, where we actually use their empty trucks from their daily deliveries to minimize trips to campus and altogether. So they're taking their after they do their deliveries to us at all of our units, they're packing up the surplus food and distributing it to a network of nonprofits that support food insecure families in the Bay Area. And that's through the Daily Table collaboration that they've established. So it's been a really exciting program that we kind of co-created and innovated. It just launched in the fall, and it's working really well so far, and so well that we're able to use it not just for dining halls, but for a lot of those catered events and other options. Let's see, Frank, yes, electric equipment at NAFM, exactly. So Exciting to hear that, Frank, you're converting an existing hall. Maybe we'll have to compare notes on that later. And I know there's a lot of, yes, a lot of buzz, and it's definitely expanding. It's not the same set of electric kitchen options that it used to be. John, how can universities have students reflect and change behaviors to move away from refined sugar, bleached flour, processed foods when vending machines and contracted suppliers, distributors still bring sodas and hot Cheetos to campus? Yeah, that's an interesting question, John. I will just tell you that we really believe in the power of partnership at Stanford, and is it's I would say about having relationships with your vendors that are go beyond transactions to say how do we future proof this work together, and invite them to be you know enablers of your own vision. If you want to make these changes happen, and you're a valued client of theirs, and you can do it in a sort of non-threatening but more of a collaborative way, you might be surprised at how they can kind of really show you options that you maybe didn't know were there before, or just start to look at what are the different intervention points. Vending machines maybe aren't going to be the easiest place to start, or they might be. It really depends. I've seen some pretty interesting healthy vending initiatives at UCLA and other UCs. But I guess I would just say what we've found to be really helpful is to say these are the values that we hold. These are our goals. This is our Eat Well program. This is our campus-wide, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging program. This is our neighborhoods program. This is our sustainable food program. These are the things that we're really believe are going to be essential to the success of to the well-being of our students, to the success of our supply chain, the sustainability success, that is the viability of it in the future, and versus sort of the expectation that maintaining status quo will be feasible in the future. And if I would say if your vendors are not responsive to that, then looking at where you can exert influence in other ways. There's contract language, there's competitive specs in terms of going elsewhere, and so forth. So I do think, and I've worked with a lot of big companies and distributors, I think that more often than not, they actually are aligned, at least directionally, and sometimes it's just the pace of change where you might be at slightly different points. So I would encourage you to have the conversation with your vendors and lay out your goals and vision and ask how they can be helpful. Okay, I think I've gone through all the questions in the chat. Thanks for the kudos. Any questions? I know, Erin, you had said at the outset that you had lots of burning questions.
Yeah, well, there was a couple that came in on the registration that we could get to.
Oh, sure. And there's one here from Anna that I can address.
Yeah, let's do that one first.
Okay, so does Stanford communicate the omissions associated with different food or meal choices with students? This is probably the number one thing I get asked in my line of work, which is, do carbon labels work? The short answer is no, they don't work. The literature does not really support that, the amount of bandwagoning, I would say, that has occurred. There's a kind of intuition, right, that if you educate people about how many emissions or something are in something, that will change their choices. And behavior change is complex, and education is one piece, one element. But I can give you 50 examples of how education alone does not change behavior. And in this context, even if you have, there's several things to consider. One is that historically, and Gen Z to some extent is the same, in some ways it's different, but historically sustainability ranks pretty low in the hierarchy of things that are the major drivers of food choices. It's typically taste, cost, convenience, and health is a close fourth. Environment doesn't mean people don't care about the environment. They just tend to not care about it as much as they care about these other things. And that often gets conflated. It's like, well, Gen Z says it's, and millennials say that they care about the planet, but then look, they're buying more beef than ever. And it's really to say, how do you sort of from my perspective, it's how do you kind of back into the foods that happen to be good for the planet by leading with those other imperatives that are actually higher priority. And when it comes to emissions, there, a lot of people are looking at it the way that calorie labeling or nutrition labeling was kind of rolled out. And again, there's kind of an intuition. Well, it seems like if you just people want transparency and they want more information. But at what point in the decision-making process? Because if you walk into a dining hall and there's signage everywhere, you either won't see it necessarily, or you'll be influenced by it maybe once or twice, but then you kind of start to be to not see that signage as much. And so the bottom line is that more research is needed, which is always a very underwhelming answer. But um, there is probably going to be some approach. We don't know yet. Is it kind of I've seen Just Salad, the fast casual brand uses a kind of daily food related emissions budget that follows that 2,000 calorie a day budget idea, which I think is kind of an interesting concept. They're studying right now if it's working. There's been a stoplight system of kind of red, yellow, green in terms of emissions, or just red, green, low impact, high impact, that kind of thing. So I think that there is an increased sort of refinement of what doesn't work, what will work. And we, as the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative, are just about to embark on kind of a version 2 best of, like a meta-analysis of essentially under what conditions does that work. And I think that is the point at which Stanford Dining would feel like, all right, the science sort of settled enough to actually implement something of that scale, because it's a huge undertaking to change all your menu, all your labeling, all your menu items toward that. So it doesn't mean that it's not a useful exercise for yourselves internally, but whether or not to actually roll that labeling out sort of operation wide, for us, we feel there needs to be more evidence to support such a decision. Okay, maybe time for one last question, Erin, maybe one from your email.
Oh, man. Okay. So there's just so many questions that I want to ask you. So I'm kind of bummed, but that's okay. We can chat more. Maybe we can do
We're going to sidebar later. All good.
Yeah. Maybe a part 2. So let's see. I like this one. We'll end on this one. You still have a long time left in your career. What goals do you have for your future self? Says Mark.
Oh, thanks for ending on that softball. That's great. Sorry, I'm typing an answer. Yeah, well, thank you. I would say one of my biggest goals in general, I really like to drive forward multi-stakeholder collaborations. So I shared the Collective Impact Initiative with the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative. I intend to see that through 2030. We've got an increasing number of schools participating. 24 is just those who've submitted their data, but we're actually increasing the number of schools contributing that data. And I not only am really passionate about this institutional purchasing power that was described, but about the collective impact of mission-aligned organizations working together toward a common goal. And so I also increasingly see opportunities for us to expand, not just us, but my own work, to expand to other mission-aligned sectors, whether that be corporate dining or K-12. And I've started to do a little bit of work in also the kind of public-private realm, where we can, if you look at, there's some really, really inspiring examples of this. The Pacific Coast Food Waste Coalition, I believe it's called. They have a really interesting example of that, where it kind of takes a kind of consortium-based collective purchasing power initiative and then layers upon it these other big kind of mayoral commitments. So I could see something like that in the future, where there's organizations like C40, mayors who have said for our entire city, around the world, 14 cities have said we declare that we're going to shift our populations to the Eat Lancet, the good planetary health diet. And that's an example where I can really see kind of these anchor institutions of campus dining who've been working at this for a long time, really working hand in hand with offices, mayors' offices around the world. Thank you, Frank. Take care. And I would love to be part of that, because I do increasingly work with city leaders in some other roles. So that's one. And then ultimately, the big picture goal is just to make climate smart, healthy eating the norm, be equal to and equated with American food culture. I ended my book How to Be a Conscious Eater with saying that I hope I'll have to stop using that term, conscious eating, because it'll just be eating. The options all around us everywhere at every price point and cuisine type and so forth will just be automatically good for us, others, and the planet. And that's the future I'm really beaming toward and hope that all of us together can work to make possible.